Welcome to another episode of Decrypting IT. I'm your host, Ashley Wallace, Client Success Lead here at Catalyst Network Group. Today, we're diving into a topic that's not just trending, it's transforming everything from how we work to how we live, and it's artificial intelligence. You've probably obviously heard the buzzwords AI, machine learning, chat GPT, automation. It's all over social media, all over the news, built into your apps and tools you use even at work. But for all the hype, there's still, I feel like, a lot of confusion. So today we're looking at what is AI really? Is it going to take over jobs? Is it safe to use in your business? And is it something you need a PhD to understand, or can anyone just start using it? So we're going to look at some of those questions and answer those. And we're going to demystify AI today. And we'll unpack what it is, how it works, and why it's such a game changer in businesses and in personal lives today. So on with me is John Arnott. John is an experienced executive. He's an author and an entrepreneur with over 25 years of leadership in digital transformation and emerging tech. As a CEO of C1M, he helps businesses boost sales through digital marketing, analytics, and AI. John's background spans IT, consulting, and data strategy across multiple industries, and he's already written 3 books that offer practical insights for leaders on marketing, sales, and technology. Very excited to have him on with us. Obviously has a huge background in what we're talking about today, so thank you so much for joining us today, John.
It's great to be here, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first, before we get into AI, just tell us a little bit more about your company and how they're really helping transform business today.
Yeah, our company is called C1M, and we help professional services businesses, typically that have long sales cycles, with adopting AI in their sales, marketing, and back office operations. We do this in a way that helps them stay ahead of their competitors.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. And thanks for providing some of the context there. So I want to just jump right in. As I mentioned, AI seems to be everywhere, but what does it really mean? So from autocomplete in emails, even you're seeing stuff on Netflix recommendations and just some simple things like that on customer service bots, I think are all over the place at this point. So it's really woven into our everyday. But how well do we actually understand it? So if you had to explain AI in simple terms, how would you explain it?
Yeah, AI is been evolving for a very long time, since the 1950s. Over the decades, we've had AIs continue to grow in certain ways, but everything at the core is around understanding patterns, right? So what AIs do is they understand patterns in numbers, patterns in words. And over the years and decades, we have been able to have more and more computing horsepower to provide more and more content, more and more data to AI so that it can find more sophisticated patterns. And that ability is what's allowed it to grow over the years. Today, AI is mostly generative AI, and that has been an evolution that has gotten it to where it's now being adopted by many organizations for solutions that they maybe couldn't have done before with traditional machine learning that existed back in the 90s, thousands, 2010s.
Okay. So that sort of where AI started, was more like with the machine learning versus where we are today.
Yeah. So it started with machine learning. It started with understanding patterns and data,
Mm-hmm.
and used for things like predictive analytics. Where things changed was in 2017, Google published a paper about the transformer. That's the T in GPT. And that invention, it allowed us to move to where AI could be much more useful for the general user. What that transformer does is it's an attention mechanism. What it does is, as you interact with the language model,
Mm-hmm.
it narrows its attention, its focus, much like we do. When we talk about something, we're not thinking about everything we know. We're thinking about that topic and narrowing it conversationally. Well, the transformer does that, and it's made it so that it's much more useful for the average user.
Mm-hmm.
That was the big transition.
Got it. Okay. That makes a little bit, puts a little more clarity around why there's so much hype about it ever since. So you said 2017. So that's been a huge shift. And that makes more sense there. So can you share an example of maybe like a business app where most people use, where AI is working behind the scenes? I guess maybe I could think of one example is like maybe Copilot, but what are some other ones out there?
Yeah. So there are different types of AI. So let's talk about where we're seeing the most traction, and that is since the end of 2022 when ChatGPT came out, we're now exposed to generative AI and really conversational AI, having a
Yep.
conversational
Okay.
interaction with an AI. And the reason for that is because these models that essentially represent knowledge have been able to get bigger and bigger and understand more concepts. Well, that ability gives them the two strengths. One is to be able to convert large amounts of content into concepts, and then to translate those concepts from one concept to another to measure the relationships between different concepts. Well, this allows us to do applications we couldn't do before. And some of those applications are fairly straightforward. They're things that do summarization. They're doing analysis. They're doing strategic planning. If you want to have a chatbot on a website, well, back in the day, just 5 years ago, those would be rules based. And let's be
Mhm.
honest, they weren't always very good. You'd have a chat conversation, it would be based on rules and eventually be like, I need to talk to a person.
Right.
Well, with the evolution of generative AI using these conversational AI capabilities, we can now train an AI just the way you train a person working at a support desk to know about the company, about their brand, about their products and services, and to be able to answer questions intelligently about it. So, a real common application that you're seeing proliferating throughout are conversational AIs. Sometimes they're on the website. You gave the example of a copilot, right? A copilot is a conversational AI that's within the context of a system. There are
Mhm.
assistants that can go off and do tasks for you. And then we are in the evolution right now of AI moving from assistants where we conversationally interact and have it do something in real time, or copilots where it answers questions about something, to agents where they autonomously go do a task, complete it, and then return the results. That's the evolution that we're on right now. And those are the types of applications you're going to see more of in 2026.
And so when you're talking about that specifically in that tech, I guess almost like a subset technology is like how I'm thinking of it. Is that accessible in like Chat GPT or, is it what platform are we seeing that in?
Yeah, great question. So there are many different chat-like experiences. ChatGPT is the one we've all heard of. Great
Yep.
product.
Yep.
There's also Claude by Anthropic. There's Gemini by Google. There's Grok by X. And of course, there's Copilot by Microsoft. And there are many others as well. There are open
Mhm.
source ones like DeepSeek.
Yep.
All of these are
Heard of that.
conversational interfaces to a large language model, a backend, but they have different levels of capabilities. However, in the fall of 2024, we started with the deployment of OpenAI's O1 getting thinking models. They're reasoning models. And what makes them different is when ChatGPT first came out, and even in 2023, when we were getting to know it as everybody was just trying it out, you would ask it a question and it would give you its first answer, which might not necessarily be the best answer, but it would give you the first thing it thought of.
Mhm. Mhm.
With a reasoning model, what it does is it goes through a chain of thought, much like we do, where before it answers the question, it literally has the equivalent of an inner monologue. You're asking this question. I know this information. I should go to this website and look at this. I now have this information step by step. The reasoning models give us better answers. The launch of O1 in the fall of 2024 and the big hyped launch of DeepSeek R1 at the beginning of 2025 exposed everybody to reasoning models. So to answer the question about are these being built in? Well, now that we have reasoning models, you are getting agent-like behavior embedded in conversational AI interfaces, those chat interfaces, where you can have it do different types of functions. Now, in OpenAI, they do that with GPTs, they do that with projects. Claude does
Okay.
that with projects, and different tools have different ways of doing it. But the way you can think about it is instead of just a chat experience, you
Mhm.
have these parameters and it has files and you give it files and it has a prompt that's for a system prompt, which is like telling an employee, this is what I need you to do. And
Yep.
then it has a user prompt and that's you asking it to interact. So this is kind of the evolution of those public tools like ChatGPT where they're getting agentic like behavior. They're not quite there. They're still
Uh-huh.
more like assistants, but it's evolving.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think, I mean, I'm obviously I would say almost a daily user of ChatGPT. Like, Copilot, we're definitely helping organizations leverage Copilot. We're leveraging that ourselves internally. I think a lot of businesses are at this point. So it's just I think we're seeing it in real time, like happening, right? Like you are getting a lot better answers back. I didn't know that that was really behind the scenes. That's pretty cool. It kind of answers the question. One of the questions I had was, can it really think on its own?
And
And
so
with the
still a great
reasoning
question.
model,
Yeah,
yeah.
so one could argue at the end of the day, it's still statistical models, but it does have a chain of thought, which means it now has the ability to create a series of steps for it to follow to answer your question. And one of the first agent-like applications we're seeing they're called deep research. And OpenAI has one, Claude has one. They're all rolling out. And the deep research agents, what they do is it's kind of like ChatGPT meets a planner. And so it
Okay.
uses a reasoning model. It creates a plan, but then within that plan, it might be I need to go off and do a web search and research this topic and get all the content back. And then I need to go think about these steps or what I got from it and go do this other step. And these deep research tools that are now rolling out allow you to do strategic planning, allow you to do the type of thing that might take a person 40 hours and a agent doing deep research might be able to do it in 30 minutes.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, how powerful, right? Like how powerful in the way it's going to transform everything that we do and make us so much more efficient. What do you feel like is the biggest myth that you've heard lately? Or the biggest misunderstanding or myth that you've heard lately around not just some of these models, but I think just in general.
Well, there's a few of
There's
them.
probably yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say there are probably a lot.
One is that, that AI is going to take over and destroy the world, things like that. And those are myths because, frankly, a person using AI for bad purposes will try to do bad things with AI well before an AI could do it on its own. Another myth is that it's stealing content from others and then regurgitating it directly back.
Mm,
Now, the reason that's a myth is because while it might be trained on the world's knowledge, 99% of the internet, it rarely responds back verbatim. Because what happens is it takes all that knowledge, all those words, it converts them into strings of numbers.
mhm.
And those strings of numbers, when you ask a question, that question's turned into numbers and they see how close they are. And then it writes in natural language its answer. So it knows what it read on the internet, but it's not you typically parroting it back.
That
And
makes
so
sense.
it's not a database with duplicates of everything it ever read. It is a database that knows everything it ever read, which is different. Like if you read
Mhm.
something and you read a book, you're going to be able to tell me what the book was about.
Right.
But it's a very unique individual that could tell you every word in that book.
Right.
It's just not our brains work. And the large language models that are used for this purpose, they work very similar to the brain that way.
That's really cool. It's really just like almost like a summarization of all different data sources that it's reading, right?
That's right.
Um,
Yeah. And what's really helpful is when you're using a model like this, the more you can give it, the better answers you get. And in this
mhm.
case, if you give it context like I'd like to hear it in this voice, or I'd like you to have this opinion, or I'd like you to apply these views to it, that summarization that you mentioned comes back in a way that's very specific to how you want that data interpreted. Because sometimes you don't want it the way it was originally written. You
Mhm.
want in a way that's been interpreted and from a different perspective.
That's a very good call out. Yeah. I was wanted to chat about, getting practical with it. So this is the perfect segue for that. So just like in daily life, if we're going to be, you have this tool and thinking about how we can leverage it in the best way. I think you just sort of touched on that, but I think it's how would someone get better about understanding how it can prompt the tool to give back the best information that it can.
Yeah, let's talk about prompting. First of all, I'd like to use an analogy to describe the way you could think about a large language model. Think of it like this. You hired an intern and they have a master's or a PhD in whatever it is you want them to do, but
Mhm.
they've never had a job and they know nothing about your company. How would you interact with that intern? You'd probably provide that intern some information. You'd probably give them some context before you ask them to do anything. When you have that thought process, you will tend to interact with the models in a way that improve the prompting because now you're thinking about, well, this intern doesn't know this about my company. I need to tell it that first, and then
Mhm.
I need to ask it to go do something for me, treating it like an assistant. If you can't just say, I need you to go write a proposal on X, Y, D, Z, if you haven't taught it who you are, what your business is, who you serve, maybe even an example of a proposal. But if you hired an intern, you would. So if you
Right.
think about it that way,
Okay.
just using natural language and is how you prompt it. There was a big buzz in 2023 about the concept of prompt engineering.
Mhm.
It's because when ChatGPT was new, we didn't have the ability to use tools and it wasn't as sophisticated as today. And so you had to be really good on your prompting. Well, that's evolved. Now, if you're developing a system that uses AI, of course, you have to be really good at prompting. But if you are an individual user on a daily basis, going to Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and just using it to help you do your job, that prompting is not prompt engineering. It's just being a really good communicator, much like you would communicate with that intern. And that is the best way to
Yep.
think about it.
That is a really good tip. I love that. That's great. I feel like definitely I feel like I've learned, as I think the more you interact with it, me on a personal level, and maybe some others who have already begun down that path of using it more frequently can probably attest to that as well. You start to learn how to interact with it better to get the information I think that you're seeking.
Yeah, and
Because
I'm sorry.
yeah.
I
Oh,
would
go
say
ahead.
one other thing to take on that is as you're doing that interaction, that prompting, back to the whole point of what the transformer does, that attention mechanism. If you can give it lots of little bites of information, keep
Mhm.
adding more, correcting more, like you just shared how you keep interacting with it,
Mhm.
it narrows its focus and gets its attention and gets better and better. And that's how you get the outputs you want. And then in tools like ChatGPT, if you're using that tool, it has the ability in one of the settings to remember things about you and your interactions and will cross into different conversations, which is great because then it will, if you have that turned on, it will always know you're Ashley and it will call you out by name.
Right. Which, I have to say can might be a little scary. I don't know if
Well,
anyone
I
else.
sometimes turn it off. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. That is awesome that it does remember though, remembers what you're inputting, but also can be, let's talk about that, some of the security side a little bit, because maybe some people are apprehensive to really engage with these tools and organizations as well. Maybe they're feeling, apprehensive. Do we let our employees use it? How are they using it? And I think those things kind of become a concern. So I did touch on a few different things though, but let's simplify that. What should companies not do when integrating AI into workflows that may involve like sensitive data?
Yeah, this is a tricky one today, right? And the reason it's tricky is because you don't want to stifle the use of conversational AI for your knowledge workers, right? You want to make
Mhm.
sure that they're doing things that make their job more productive, make them more productive. On the other hand, you have to have some sort of policies in place. Now, fortunately, some of the companies are already building in really good security. For example, if you're a Microsoft shop and you're using Office 365 and you choose to use Copilot, well, Copilot fully respects the Microsoft security framework. So if you're using two factor
Okay.
authentication, you're secured. If you upload documents into SharePoint or Teams, you can feel comfortable putting something in Copilot. It's the exact same security. And in fact, if you're using
Okay.
Copilot within Teams and you ask it a question, if the answer is in a document that you don't have rights to because maybe you're not a member of that team, you will not get the answer. So from a security
Okay.
perspective, Microsoft has taken a really strong stance on that and it started with security first. When
Mhm.
you use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, I encourage you to, if you're uploading financial information, de-identify it, remove the name of the company from the top. If you're uploading, say, resumes, replace somebody's name with their initials, or if you have an applicant tracking system, their applicant number.
Oh.
And if you're doing something that has IP for your company that you're just concerned about,
Mhm.
when you're done with that interaction and if you're using a public tool like a ChatGPT or a Claude, just delete that history. You can go hit the three dots and click on delete or archive, and then you just don't have it there. And the reason I say that is because the higher risk, the security risk is bigger with somebody sniffing your account at an airport or a cafe and logging in as you, much
Oh.
more than that data getting into the wrong hands through, say, Anthropic or OpenAI.
I see. Do these tools are they at risk for being breached? I would imagine that people are trying to get in there and get all the data that's being thrown in there and that's
So this is
available.
also where organizations have to think about if there are AI tools that are part of their business processes, that should be something they control. So when you think about like a conversational AI, like I'll use the example of HR documents. So you have
Mhm.
policies and procedures, you have vacation policy, the company handbook, you have benefits, you have all that information, lots of documents.
Sure.
And say you're not in the Microsoft ecosystem, but maybe you want to secure that. And so you don't just want to you don't want to just email out PDFs and you don't want to put it in ChatGPT for whatever reason. Well,
Mm.
that's where you may have your own database to store those things. And much like we store enterprise data in a SQL database, an SQL database,
Mhm.
you store knowledge in a vector database. But at the end of the day, it's still just a database that you can have at Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud, just like your relational data. So when
Okay.
you're really concerned about the knowledge and you don't want it out in an external party, you host it in a database at a data center, just like you do with your operations data. Um, and you still use the large language models like OpenAI and Anthropic to do the interpretation, but you store your data in some place that you control, like an Azure, Amazon, or Google Cloud data center.
Okay. No, that makes me I feel relieved knowing that. Knowing that. Makes me feel a little bit more safe there. Um, what's, looking forward a little bit more and obviously there's been a huge uptick. I mean, there's been so much evolving in the last 5 years even, maybe in the last year. I've seen you mentioned like the research or the reasoning capability and just some of these other capabilities. It seems so fast that that's happening. Where do you see it going? What's an AI trend that you're kind of keen to right now, keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so there are two trends that I'm watching closely. The first one is the models evolved to something called multimodal a while ago, which means that they don't only take in words, they take in video, they take in audio, they take in images, and they create video, they create audio, they create images. And I keep track on multimodal simply because I believe that everything that we're doing in natural language with a chat like interface is getting better and better at having a conversational interface like you and I are having right now. Like imagine we're doing a call like this, but one of us is an AI, right? Like that is an evolution that we're observing. And the voice
Wow.
models are getting really, really good. And they're improving so quickly that the latency and delay that you could always just detect an AI is
Mhm.
talking is getting better and better. So that's something I'm watching closely so that you can have a conversation like this rather than one that's a little bit more, a little bumpier right now that what we have. But the second thing I'm watching and interacting with and using is the move towards agents. And an
Mhm.
agent is a little different than an assistant in that a couple things that make it different is it's accountable for some outcome and it works off of goals. But the second thing is it has long-term memory and the ability to adapt and change over time based on human feedback. What we're seeing now and will continue to happen is agents will take on different tasks that human worker has a job and that job has responsibilities and those responsibilities have tasks. Some of those tasks will be done by agents with that human's oversight. The key to success there though is the human oversight. What we like to say is human directed AI enabled. A
Okay.
person interacting with agents to get some work done is
Mhm.
something that you're going to see it in 2025, but it's really going to be really growing in 2026. Like it's something that everyone will just have their agents that they work with, and we won't really think much about it.
Wow, I'm trying to can you give me more examples around, like, how you interface with that? Like
So you and I are having a conversation, and but you've prepared for it, right? So you have the notes, the things that you want to make sure we discuss. Well, imagine on your screen, we don't see it, but you see another agent, and it is actually prompting you. Ask him more about this. Oh, he didn't go into enough detail on that. Ask him this question
okay.
as a follow up. Imagine the agent is actually your coach sitting there. We're already building a coach like right now for our sales, for our account executives, that
Okay.
the account executive, when they run a discovery call, the coach will sit there and prompt them on things that our potential client hasn't either gone enough detail on or we haven't addressed enough. That would be an agent. It's just
Wow.
a coach helping you do your job better.
Okay, that is really cool. I just see that in, and I know there are technologies out there specifically for like contact centers, but that was what came to my mind immediately was when you're saying
Yeah.
that's kind of like the contact center, or even I guess in sales scoping conversations, as you mentioned, there's definitely a lot of application for that.
And contact centers are already changing rapidly, whereas that is one where AI is displacing people, right? Is
I was going to
if you
ask.
had 1,000 people in a call center in the Philippines, you may have 50 in that same call center people, but then you have 2,000 AI agents that spin up or spin down based on volume. And so that is a change because of what I mentioned, that multimodal capability where they're able to
Hmm.
converse, interact. They can already answer questions really well with chat when they can answer questions and speak like you and I are speaking right now, which is happening right now, that is changing that entire industry.
Wow, that's gonna be awesome to see that come to life a little bit more, right? I think that is a fear though, that now that you mentioned it is, there's anxiety and fear maybe around AI replacing jobs. So that's obviously in some areas that's a realistic fear. Would you agree?
Absolutely, it's a legitimate fear. What others have said, and I tend to agree with, is people won't be replaced with AI so much as people will be replaced with other people that use AI. So I encourage everyone, like you, use it every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just get comfortable with these tools because they just will be a part of daily life. Get comfortable being more efficient using the capabilities that the generative tools have and don't push back on it because that is the direction
That's the
that we're
future.
heading. That's
Here we
exactly right.
go. Taking us into the future. That's awesome. I wanna leave around and kind of close out what we're talking about today with looking into some things around government, how the government may be regulating, or if it's just things that are happening around regulations right now.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because each country has its own approach. The EU is having their own approach. So there are two different like schools of thought on this. One is
Mhm,
that we're building AIs at such a rapid pace. Because remember, each time we make progress, we use AI to help us make more progress. So it's a
mhm,
curve, okay? It's increasing at a curve. And the challenge is that at what point does oversight slow innovation? And at the same time, at what point is oversight necessary to ensure that we are responsibly building AI? Now that we have thinking models, what type of oversight needs to happen to determine if those thinking models are doing things the way we want them to evolve? Because at some point, because I told you deep research can put together a plan. As soon as the model can put together a plan and then execute that plan, we have to make sure the plans it generates are for the greater good. Now that varies by culture, that varies by country,
mhm.
but that's something that is happening now. I don't know if government regulation is the way to do that, but I do believe there has to be some sort of responsible adoption.
Yeah.
Anthropic is the one that created Claude, and have been very good about publishing responsible AI beliefs. And they've actually created their own internal studies
Okay.
that understand what the AI is doing so that they can mitigate any risks of them going rogue. Now, their research they share, so it benefits OpenAI, it benefits
Community.
Google, it benefits all of those that are building these large models. So we have companies like Anthropic, and there's other smaller companies that are doing the same thing. And so I think the public sector is actually going to be very helpful here, more so than having a government entity where it's run by somebody who
Mhm.
doesn't understand AI trying to regulate AI. I think that's the one that's not going to work as well.
That'll be harder. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Do you think that there's gonna be any differentiation between, I guess, amongst business size? Like, the differences do you think there's gonna be any regulations in regard to enterprise to small to mid-sized business, or do you think it's all gonna be kind of like this blanket?
My my
That's hard to
hope
tell, probably a
My
hard
hope is
question.
that it's purely at the technology and model level and not at the usage level, right? I'm
Yeah,
hoping that there's no, because otherwise it's just going to be too hard to interpret what you can and can't do as a small to mid-sized business, right?
right.
And so there's nothing that currently that leads us to believe that businesses that only use AI but that are not building new models have any sort of risk around some sort of compliance rules. But you
Got
never
it.
know; things can change.
Yeah. Always changing, right? How do you think that we can strike a balance between adopting AI, or businesses can in organizations, and then staying compliant with some of those privacy laws that might be coming out? Like, how do you go about doing that? Are we reliant on the regulation prior to, or what does that look like?
Well, I think it starts in an organization. It starts with the acceptable use policy, right? So just
Okay.
start with the basics, which is these are the do's and don't do's with this technology, but make it easy to understand because once you confuse your team, then they're just not going to use it, and then you don't get the benefit. And then with the acceptable use policy, then adopt AI in different areas of your business. I like to start with marketing because then it has to learn everything about your business first, then move into operations and delivery of whatever services or products you create using AI to support those. And as you're building those, AI infrastructure, move from just an acceptable use policy
Hmm.
to something more sophisticated, which is this is how we use models. This is how we develop against them. This is our limitations. And then build in, as you're developing those, what are called guardrails, right? Actually
Okay.
rigid parameters around how models get used so that somebody in your organization can't either intentionally or accidentally do something that will hurt the organization or hurt somebody external to the organization.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good, great tips. And that was, what I really wanted to kind of touch on is remembering. If we're going to remember one thing from today's conversation, I feel like there's so many good highlights and actionable tips that we can take away. But what would you say it would be? Maybe for the personal user, and then from a business perspective, like an organizational perspective.
Well, the first thing I have to say is that experiment, use it every day like you are, Ashley. Try things. You're not going to break it. And if you're concerned about it making things up, the term is called hallucinations, where it very emphatically says the wrong answer. Realize that you're probably not doing a very good job of training that intern, which is what it is, on what it is you want your output, because it's only going to give you what you ask for based on how you teach it what you want. And so use it every day, but make sure that you're interacting with it in a way that you're not abdicating to it and just expecting it to have all the answers, but rather
Right.
guiding it as if it's somebody working for you. And do it every day, and then enjoy the fact that every couple of weeks you'll be like, wow, it's behaving different and way better than it was a few weeks ago, because it's a fun thing to watch just how much it's improving.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And then, if people are looking for next steps on, where they can go and how they can, better, more understanding on AI, I guess we just talked about recommending what they would do, but looking at organizations that may be looking at next steps on implementing AI and technology, where can they go to for help with that?
Well, of course, they can learn from your organization. They can learn at c1m.ai about what we're doing in sales, marketing, and operations with AI. I also encourage just keeping up with YouTube videos on what's happening with reasoning models. Sometimes it gets a little too techy, but sometimes you get some fun gems in there, and just trying to stay current. It's not possible to stay up to date on everything that's happening because something happens every day.
Yeah.
But every now and then, just going to your website, our website, or YouTube, and just see what new news has happened, and then go back to your whatever tool of choice you have and experiment with what you learned.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for the information and the time. Really appreciate it. This has been super valuable, I feel like. So I know our listeners are going to find it valuable as well. And if we've got more questions, we know now where to go. Come over to Catalyst, come on to C1M and get some more information around AI. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's episode of Decrypting IT. Again, if you have questions about how to use AI more intentionally or more securely, reach out to us at Catalyst. We're here to help. John's obviously available to help as well. And you can head to catalystng.com or submit any questions you have to podcast@catalystng.com. Please also feel free to suggest a topic, anything you're interested in that we haven't covered in our episodes thus far. We'd love to hear from you on those. So you can send an email to the same email, podcast@catalystng.com. John, thanks again so much for your time. Really appreciate all the information. Thanks for spending the last half hour or so with me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ashley.
Awesome. Until next time, guys, stay secure and stay ahead.